Hey, yo, what's the deal? Miss your boy Tag from Pro Wrestling Tag, you know what I mean? As of this recording right now, it is 10:12 a.m., September 17th, 2025. You know what I mean? I'm getting dressed so I could go down and buy some food. It looked like it's gonna rain. You know what I mean? So my Puerto Rican ass is not coming outside. You know, I might not come outside to do a video. I mean, I might have some things to do anyway. You know what I mean? But I definitely will be coming with Vince today for sure. Without a shadow of a doubt. You know what I mean? So this topic is usually a topic I would do for a Sunday. Right? Yeah, I know I love doing my discussion topics. Because with Sunday, I love speaking my mind in terms of the other aspects of wrestling. You know what I mean? Like, listen, I'm a wrestling connoisseur. I love pro wrestling. You know what I mean? Like, I thank y'all for subscribing to my channel. I'm just a guy from Brooklyn who just loves professional wrestling. Over the last decade and a half, right? I say over the last decade and a half, the independence has been a top thing in professional wrestling. A very top subject. To the point where a lot of major promotions, scour talent to sign said independent talent, right? Even though the WWE has the Performance Center, they still bring in independent talent to help mold them into the way how WWE sees fit, right? What made me want to bring up this topic, and I thought about something, right, with the independents. Of course, as you guys know also, there are a lot of independent talent, almost all independent talent, that freelance. They basically freelancing is like you sign to something, you sign to an organization and such for a duty, right? And you get paid for set duty, right? So for example, let's say if I am a contractor for a building, right? Let's say if, I'm not tied to any contract and such by an organization. I have my own business, right? And, I go from, I built the arena right here at the Barclays Center in downtown Brooklyn to the UBS Arena in Queens, New York, right? I have my own company that do that. I get, the people who, the people who owns the rights to the names and such, right? They pay me, to do the building, right? So I'm basically independent, I'm a freelance contractor, right? So basically I can go and build, build stuff wherever I want because I have a paid contract to do so, right? I have a freelance contract, right? I'm not tied to, an organization stuff. This is me and my business, right? It's the same thing with professional wrestlers now in today's day and age with the independents, right? You got people who they go from, they sign from one major independent to another for the week, right? For the week. That, like, remember Chikara? Remember the promotion Chikara? I remember AJ Styles and I think the Young Bucks, who at the time were, members of Bullet Club and also members of Ring of Honor, also wrestling in a tournament for Chikara. And Chikara was supposed to be, at the time, Chikara was a prominent independent promotion. Just like, Ring of Honor. Only difference is that Ring of Honor had TV. You couldn't do that like way back in the days, like what you do, like what you're doing now in terms of wrestling for different promotions, especially if you are signed to a major promotion. What made me think about doing this was MJF. So MJF, who is a contracted wrestler, to a quote unquote mainstream promotion like AEW appeared twice for MLW, right? Which is a prominent independent. Now, there's no work agreement that I know of between AEW and MLW. But, the fact that he appeared on there, right? Again, it lets me know that freelancing, it's still active in today's professional wrestling landscape. It wasn't like that back then, right? Unless you had a work agreement, right? You could not go from a major promotion to a primary independent promotion and wrestle matches and such. You couldn't do that, especially in the 90s, especially in the fucking 90s. That's like, okay, and I'm going to get to the territories in a bit. That's like if I'm a WWE superstar, right? And, at the time, let's say if I'm working for the World Wrestling Federation, right? Unless I have a work agreement with said promotion, I can't just go and sign with or sign to do a match with a random independent promotion. I can't do fucking the Global Wrestling Federation, right? I can't take a booking for the Global Wrestling Federation at that time, right? Because there's no work agreement. Again, the territories had died during that time, right? So you had to wrestle for one company unless there was a work agreement with another wrestling company where I could do matches for, right? Where I could be booked to do shows for. The territories. See, it was different in the territories where there was quote unquote freelancing, where wrestlers could wrestle in different promotions and stuff, different independent promotions. However, it was regional. And, a certain wrestling promotion controlled that region. Example, the AWA, right? The American Wrestling Association. The American Wrestling Association, their region was basically what? Around the Minnesotas, right? The Minnesotas. Around the Midwest, actually. The Midwest. They basically, if I'm not mistaken, they ruled the Midwest. So, you had Illinois, you had Wisconsin, you had Michigan. You know what I mean? I think you had Ohio too, if I'm not mistaken. But, if you're gonna wrestle for other promotions, right? Or if you're gonna take bookings, they will allow you to take bookings, but you will have to take bookings within that region. That's how the territories worked at the time, right? So that means you couldn't work for Vince, for Vince Sr. and work for the AWA at the same time. I wasn't going to do that. That's not the NWA. The NWA was basically doing that, right? So if you're working for the NWA, right, and the NWA has a work agreement with, let's say, the AWA within the territories, right? If they had a work agreement, right? Not only I could do, regional, I could, wrestle in different regional promotions from the promotion I signed to, the AWA, but also now I could also do the same thing with the NWA, right? Because of the territories. That's why, so like where I'm at, right, which is in New York, I'm in Brooklyn, New York. My region is basically the Northeast. The World Wrestling Federation controlled the Northeast at the time, right? We're talking about during the territory days, right? And I do believe they did have a work agreement with the NWA, but if we're talking about, the Northeast, right? They always say New York, right? New York is, is the World Wrestling Federation, right? Even though their offices is right there in Connecticut. The Northeast, basically New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, fucking Delaware, let me see, Wells, I said Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont. You know what I'm saying? Like those, like I could wrestle within that region. I can take indie bookings and such. I can take, regional bookings or bookings to promotions for that region. That's how the territories work. There was no freelancing like what you have now. There were not. That's like, give you another example, right? That's like Booker T, working in WCW. Let's say if territories was in the 90s, right? That's like WCW, right? Harlem Heat, right? Harlem Heat, they can only take bookings anywhere in Georgia, right? Anywhere in Georgia. So that means, a promotion in Georgia, affiliated with that region, or not, or not affiliated with that region, right? No. Fuck am I talking about? That's like, okay, that's like if Harlem Heat, right? Like they would be crazy because Harlem Heat, a WCW team, right? Working for Global Championship Wrestling, right? Or the Global Wrestling Federation, right? During that time, no affiliation with any promotion, none whatsoever. And then they go to, they go to the American Wrestling Federation, right? And work shows there. And also that's another thing too, storylines and belts. Now, I mean, that shit would have been all over the place. If there was freelancing, if there was pro wrestling, booking freelancing during that time, it would be a fucking mess. It would legit be a fucking mess. In the 90s, it would be a mess. But because of the, I'll tell you why two reasons why, freelancing and pro wrestling is popular, right? Not only because you can, again, independent, but also pro wrestling tees, to me, I think is another big reason why. I think pro wrestling tees is a huge reason why the independence, is popping, and why people can do freelancing. Shit, people also take bookings overseas too. I mean, New Japan Pro Wrestling. You know what I mean? I mean, it's crazy. Like you could not do freelancing back in the days. You couldn't do it. I mean, you could not do it. There was no such thing as free. They wouldn't even allow it. They wouldn't even allow freelancing in pro wrestling like what you got now with the independents. You kidding me? There will be a fucking loyalty test. Now, I mean, imagine Bret Hart. Imagine fucking Bret Hart, a WWE contracted wrestler, right? Fucking wrestling for, let me see. Let me think of another promotion at the time that was there. You can't say ECW because there was a work agreement there. Let's say fucking, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to fucking think of a promotion. The NWA. The NWA for sure. But the NWA. Right? The NWA. Not WCW, but the NWA. He decides to take a booking, for the NWA. Right? There would be controversy there at the time. In the 90s, what? What? Because the NWA is considered independent. WWE is considered a mainstream, right? It can't work. There's no way it's going to work. So I think wrestlers today are pretty fucking lucky. Because think about this too. Also, that's another thing as well. Like, it's hard to kind of distinguish, who this wrestler is loyal to and such. Because AJ Styles, I fucking love AJ Styles. AJ Styles is hands down one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. He's the best. To me, he's the greatest wrestler within the last 2 decades. Sorry, but it's the truth. Even though he came from TNA and people know him as Mr. TNA, I also remember him slowly and surely from Ring of Honor. So it's like, and mind, he wrestled for both at the same time. So it's like, where do you distinguish, either or? I don't know. It's just confusing and such, but. Freelance booking in pro wrestling in the 90s, that clearly wouldn't happen. Clearly. There would be a colossal fucking mess if that happened. Right? Anyway, but let me go buy some Spanish food, and I will be coming with another video today, so I'm gonna holler at y'all. Peace.